I'm just reflecting on my summer. And I have been going. Feels like I have been gone. Like it's hard to know what's going on in the life of the body at some points because we had our fireworks stand at the beginning of the summer, and that was a lot. And we were at church for those couple hours, but very focused on the season, and that wrapped up. And we went straight to middle school camp for a week, and so we were here on the weekend, but a little bit drained from doing middle school camp up at Pinewood. And then my wife and I had the opportunity to go to Oregon, where my brother got married, and we were there for a week. My brother and my cousin both got married that week, so we did a twofer. Came back real quick, had, I think, was it like 8 hours to repack and do laundry, and then we went to high school camp for a week, and as soon as that ended, we took our high school team that you heard about last week to Gilead for a week, and then I went on a trip, and that's where I was last week, and so I feel like my summer has just gone by like crazy. But I was in Canada last week. I went with my dad, who had been wanting to do this trip for a number of years, and he's asked me the last couple of years, and in theory it sounded great, but it's hard to make all of those things line up. But we did it. So my cousin, he's a pilot up in northern Canada in Yellowknife area. So if you know where that is, Northern Territories of Canada. Any of you guys watch Alone, that survival show? So they filmed a couple of seasons on the lake that my cousin flies around at, the Great Slave Lake. And so that's where we were at last week. My dad and my uncle and my cousin and I, we went fishing, and I have pictures to prove. We actually caught the size of fish that those people, it's ridiculous. So it was a lot of fun. But getting to Canada was a little bit of an issue. It seemed like we had 3 flights. I had 3 flights to get there. And the flight from Boise to Seattle was fine. But as soon as we got to the border, it was a delay, and we were stuck in Seattle for 12 hours, and then we had to stay in Calgary for a night because we missed our flight and the connection, and it was all crazy. But we eventually made it to northern Canada. We fished for the week. It was a lot of fun. Coming back was even worse. It was terrible. We flew to Calgary. My dad and my uncle had what's called global entry. So that's for if you go out of the country often, you can skip the line and jump straight into getting through customs. And I didn't know why they did this, but in Canada, you have to clear customs on the Canadian side and then also in the state side. So we got to do it twice. But because I didn't have this global entry secret ticket, I went into this line that, this is a huge long story, but there was a kind of a riot, or not a riot, a strike. Yeah, the Air Canada flights, they didn't want to fly. They're trying to get more money, and so what's the word I'm looking for on that? Anyway, you know what I'm saying. So because of all of this, it was crazy at the airport. I missed my flight from Calgary, Canada, to Portland by about 3 minutes. They closed the door. They wouldn't open it. So I got stuck in Calgary for 36 hours. So I was supposed to be here on Monday afternoon. I got back very early on Wednesday in the morning. So I did my sermon prep this week in Canada. So we'll see if it translates, eh? But the reason I tell you that kind of funny story is, 1, because I want you to feel sorry for me, but 2, because we're going to be talking in Psalm 55 about hurt, about difficulty. But it's not the kind of difficulty that just comes as a result of travel woes. It's not even the kind of difficulty that we experience just in the normalcy of life. When I got back on Wednesday morning, I got to do a little bit of time. I had to go and teach at one of the schools, so I had a couple hours, and I was reacquainting myself with Brody, and we were playing, and he started walking funny, and it turns out he got a sliver in his foot, real big sliver, and he was not letting us take it out. And so, we're trying, and the more we touch it, the more he's crying, but he can't put any weight on it. So we eventually had to pin him down, and we're doing this out of love. We want him to be comfortable, right? He did not think that this was out of love. I think that if Brody could tell you his take on Psalm 55, he might have a different take. But we're not even talking about the hurt of physical pain. Psalm 55 is a maskil of David. That term is a biblical term. We don't exactly know what it means. Probably some kind of strategic teaching song, reflection song. And this Maskil, Psalm 55, is the last of 4 in a row by David. It's probably a teaching psalm. Psalm 52, the first, deals with David's betrayal of Doeg. You remember that guy who went and ratted on him when he was running from Saul. He came and ate the bread of presence that he wasn't supposed to eat and then carried on. And Doeg went and told Saul where to find him. And so David reflects on that in Psalm 52. In Psalm 54, another betrayal by the men of Ziph, and David reflects on that. Today in Psalm 55, we're going to see an unnamed friend of David who betrays him. And then Psalm 53, I think maybe is kind of in the middle for a reason. It shows us the root of what betrayal does. David's enemies have turned against God, and they are atheists in the deepest sense. He starts Psalm 53, the fool says in his heart, there is no God. And it seems like these maskils are built one on top of another to reflect on the difficulty of life. And so that's where we find ourselves today. So in Psalm 55, we're just going to tackle this in a few different sections, but I want to ask a question. I don't want to make a statement today. I want to ask a question. And here's the question that I think will help us as we read through this psalm. How should I respond to hurt and betrayal in life? Not the hurt of travel plans that have gone awry, not the hurt of even physical slivers in our foot, but how do you and I respond to the calculated, intentional, sinful hurt that is done to us by others? Probably you can think of a time in your life that might resonate with you. Somebody that you maybe had a relationship with of some sort, a coworker, a neighbor, a family friend. Maybe they did something to you that really, really stung. It was a wound that is hard to conceal. For some of us, we've felt this to the deepest part of ourselves. A loved one, a family member, somebody who we once looked at so differently than we do now because of the hurt and the betrayal that we experience. And so the question that I think David helps us to assess today is, how do you and I respond to hurt and betrayal? Because it's going to happen. I think Psalm 55 helps us to do that. So I want to just read in 4 different sections. This list is not exhaustive. I don't know that if David were standing here today, he wouldn't say some different things than I'm going to say. But as I've worked through this psalm, I think that there are 4 really helpful things for us to consider as we answer the question, how should I respond to hurt in my life? And so the first is this. David mirrors this for us, but as we are delving into hurt and betrayal, the first thing we ought to do is to be authentic, to be transparent, to be honest about the fact that we're hurting. Look at Psalm 55. We're going to read verses 1 through 8, and David really kicks off this psalm with a reflection of authenticity. He says this, Psalm 55, 1 through 8. Give ear to my prayer, O God, and hide not yourself from my plea for mercy. Attend to me and answer me. I'm restless in my complaint, and I moan because of the noise of the enemy, because of the oppression of the wicked. For they drop trouble on me, and in anger they bear a grudge against me. My heart is in anguish within me. The terrors of death have fallen upon me. Fear and trembling come upon me, and horror overwhelms me. And I say, oh, that I had wings like a dove, I would fly and be at rest. Yes, I would wander far away, and I would lodge in the wilderness. I would hurry to find shelter from the raging wind and tempest. Not so encouraging as David is being authentic with where he finds himself. We don't know, like I said, the issue that has arisen in David's life. There are some scholars who have some ideas of what could be going on. But whatever the context is, it is clear, abundantly clear, that David is in turmoil. David is hurting. And it seems like as he's trying to process what is going on in life, he chooses to be real. I just highlighted a couple of the words that he uses. He pours out his heart to God. He's restless, verse 2. He says that they're dropping trouble on his head in verse 3. He's in anguish, verse 4. There is even a terror of death. David is afraid for his life in whatever is going on. There's fear and trembling and horror in verse 5. And it seems to me that as David is wrestling through this really difficult situation in life, he does a really good job of being open and honest and authentic. How do you navigate hurt? I'm asking myself. Jarren, how do you navigate hurt? When you're hurting, when you are in distress, when you have things that have come against you that are keeping you up at night so that you can't sleep, how do you navigate that? Do you talk about it? Do you talk about it only with certain people? Do you conceal it? Do you pretend like it doesn't exist? Do you ignore it? Do you push it down and say, if I can just forget about this for long enough, it'll eventually go away? It doesn't seem like any of those things are David's go-to. David bears his burden to the Lord. Give ear to my prayer, O God. Listen to me, hear me, don't hide from me. I want to hide. I want to be like a bird that flies away and get out from here. But I am in turmoil. The first thing that we see in Psalm 55 is that as we navigate hurt, one of the best things that you and I can do, maybe not the most comfortable thing, but one of the best things we can do is to be authentic about where we are. Secondly, we see this in verses 9 through 19, that David remembers God. David has a relationship. He is a great role model for us in all of the Psalms that he coined. In the good and the bad and the ugly, David remembers who God is. Look at verse 9 and following. It says this: Destroy, O Lord, and divide their tongues. For I see violence and strife in the city. Day and night they go around on its walls, and iniquity and trouble are within it. Ruin is in its midst. Oppression and fraud do not depart from its marketplace. For it is not an enemy who taunts me, then I could bear it. It is not an adversary who deals insolently with me, then I could hide from him. But it is you, a man, my equal, my companion, my familiar friend. I want to just pause for a second. It is clear from the psalm, as David is being authentic with God, and he's recalling God's work throughout the history of the nation and through his own life, David gets to the point where he says, what is really going on? We're given clarity on the issue. Verse 13, it's you, a man, my equal, my companion, my friend. Have you ever heard it said that those who are closest to you are those who are able to do the greatest harm, hurt to you? Have you experienced that? I can think of a number of times in my life where those who I thought would never be that person to say that thing, that person to point out that flaw. And it cuts deep, and it seems like verse 13 helps us to understand what is going on. Verse 14, David says, we used to take sweet counsel together within God's house. We walked in the throng. Verse 15, let death steal over them. Let them go down to Sheol alive, for evil is in their dwelling place and in their heart. But I call to God, and the Lord will save me. Evening and morning and at noon, I utter my complaint and I moan, and he hears my voice. He redeems my soul in safety from the battle that I wage, for many are arrayed against me. God will give ear and humble them. He was enthroned from of old, because they do not change and they do not fear God. I'll just pause and say that some of the commentaries that I referenced in preparing for today, nobody really said anything about this point, about remembering God. But I think it's so clear in the text that as David is giving clarity to the authenticity, the heart cry of the context that he finds himself in, David says, it is my friend who hurt me. And that person that I used to do life with, that I used to do ministry with, that is the person that I'm asking for you to deal with as you've dealt with throughout the history. In verse 9, he says, divide their tongues. I think that's a clear callback to the Tower of Babel. You remember when those wicked men tried to elevate themselves to God, and so God confused their language, he divided their tongues? I think David is saying, I remember what you did in Genesis 11. I remember how you dealt with the wicked. Do that now. In verse 15, he says, take them down to Sheol alive. That has shades of the rebellion of Korah. We just preached through that last year. Do you remember that? When Korah and the men decided to disobey and to come against Moses and Aaron, and so God opened the earth and swallowed them alive. David says, you've done it once. Do it now. And then in verse 19, this idea of God being enthroned from of old, this is very similar language to Deuteronomy 33, where Moses, as the nation is about to enter the promised land, Moses gives this encouragement to the nation that God is on his throne. And it seems like David is rooting his heart cry in the ways that God has worked. I think the second point we see is that we ought to remember God. Now, I want to just take a pause for a second. I'll tell you a brief story. I'm not going to go into so much detail, but I think there are enough of us in this room that have probably experienced the taste of hurt and betrayal. And that memory, that storyline maybe is flashing across your memory right now. When I read this and I was working through it, there are a few things that come to my mind, but none as prevalent as what happened to me a couple of years ago in youth ministry at my previous church I was at. There was a kid who, as a freshman, came and we met him at a ministry fair. He was a ministry major and was excited to get plugged in. He came, and this kid for 4 years was with our ministry. So I would say probably the core foundational years for me of learning what it was to be a pastor and to work with young men and women. This kid was one of those that I would say he's my partner. Like if I need him to come to an event, if I need someone to have my back, this guy was my guy. And I remember being so encouraged in so many ways doing ministry with him. I remember he was the one who had these ideas of some things that had been really important to him as a student. And so we started doing a young kind of leaders growth group at my house, and he was leading it. And there were so many kids that really became foundational leaders in our youth ministry as a result of that. And this kid, as he did his work in college, if you would have asked me his senior year, where is this guy going to end up? I would have said, whatever church hires him is going to be better for it. He's a stud. And I remember the day that he walked from graduation, he posted this thing on social media about sexual orientation and identity that he had been struggling with. I had no idea. I had no comprehension that this was something that he was going through. He never talked to me about it once. But he walked and that day put on social media, this is who I am. I'm not fighting anymore. I'm giving into it. I remember that next week as those high schoolers came to my house, broken, and so confused. How could he do this? What does this even mean? This isn't real. How can we be sure about anything? And I remember being so angry. And I had some good, godly people in my life, 2 pastors at my staff, some Corbin profs that helped navigate that with me. But I remember as I was processing through that really hurtful story in my life, I remember getting to the point where I was able to say to these kids that were vibrant in their faith but so confused that what this guy chose to do, it doesn't discount all of the things that God used in and through his ministry. One of those kids was coming to this church last year and is still walking with the Lord. And God can do great things in and through even broken and sinful people. And that's you and me. The enemy that David is referring to isn't an enemy that's outside the gates. It's the enemy that's within. It's those close friends who are figuratively guarding the walls of the city. It's those who are actually set on destruction of the city. And as David processes this hard truth that you and I have had to experience in life to some extent, sometimes people fail. Sometimes people change. Sometimes people give in to their sin. But God is still God. God does not change. God does not give in. God does not come to defeat because of the brokenness of people. And David, as he's wrestling with he calls out, remember what you've done and do it again, God. Be faithful to your character, your qualities, and yourself. So David is authentic. David remembers God. The third thing that I think we see in this passage, after this question, what is your first response in the midst of hurt and betrayal? Is it anger? That was me. Is it defeat? Is it questioning? I think all of those things could be true. The question is, what should it be? When we taste the betrayal of somebody maybe who is close in proximity or maybe very close, the one that's supposed to be in our corner, the one that we partnered with, what is our response ought to be? David remembers God. And it moves him to this next point, that just like we remember who God is, we also need to recognize the brokenness of the world. In verse 20 and 21, David says this, my companion, this close friend who used to walk with me and to do ministry and was aligned with me, who is now against me, is attacking me, is out to get me, my companion stretched out his hand against his friends, and he violated his covenant. His speech was as smooth as butter, yet war was in his heart, and his words were softer than oil, yet they were drawn swords. Have you ever heard the phrase, those who are out to get you, they pat you on the back just to see where the softest spot is for the knife? I think this is what David is talking about. There's calculated betrayal, and David is saying, listen, this person who said the right things, did the right things, his motives were sinful. They were broken. He violated his covenant. War was in his heart. David recognizes the root cause of all of the stuff that he writes about, all of the stuff he was guilty of, all of the stuff that he witnessed as a shepherd and as an anointed king and as an old man. David recognizes the effect of sin. And I think that this is a lesson for you and I as we are dealing with hurts and betrayals in our life, and we learn to be authentic about him, and we learn to recognize God and his character. We also need to not be so foolish to say, sin doesn't touch me. Sin doesn't affect me. I'm not culpable in sinful acts and responses. Because that is the fool. The enemy in Psalm 55 did violence in his relationship with God. He walked in a visible place of honor with David. It seems like into the temple or the tabernacle worship of God. He seemed like he was genuine. David had no reason to doubt him. He looked good, like an every church or an every Sunday at church kind of person, but he was false. He belonged with the wicked. Can I tell you something? People will fail you. People will fail you. Your faith cannot rest on a human being. It can't rest on Pastor Dan or Pastor Jarren or Pastor whoever your favorite internet preacher is. Can you think of some names, even in recent years, of some of those great titans of the faith who have fallen? I won't say them. You know. Our faith cannot rest on a person. It must rest on Jesus, the only one who knew no sin and yet became sin for you and for me. We need to recognize that sin is a problem, and that understanding of the consequences, the cost of sin, makes Jesus that much more important and valuable to you and to me. We need to be authentic. We need to remember God, his character, his qualities. We need to recognize sin. And finally, when those three things are true, let me ask you this question before we move on. Do you expect the consequences of sin to touch your life? And if not, should you? I would imagine some of those great ministry leaders who have fallen would at some point have said, I've outgrown my danger to be sucked into sin. And that's a strategy of Satan. We will never grow beyond our ability to be destroyed by sin. We need to remember that. And so when all those three things are true, it's at this point that David embodies what it is to relinquish his burden. This betrayal, this hurt. In verse 22 and 23, I think this is the high point of the psalm. This is what David works to at the end of his takeaway, his application. Verse 22, cast your burden on the Lord, and he will sustain you. He will never permit the righteous to be moved, but you, O God, will cast them down into the pit of destruction. Men of blood and treachery shall not live out half their days. David says, I give my burden to you. I recognize that you are the judge. You are the God who is able to judge rightly, and you'll do it in your way and in your timing, and I have to be okay with that. And he ends with this last verse. But I will trust you. But I will trust you. If I'm honest as I stand up here, reflecting on some of these things, authenticity and remembering God and recognizing sin and relinquishing my burdens, it would be a lie for me to say that this is my number one reaction to every hurt and betrayal and hard thing that I've ever felt. And if you were to tell me that you trust God in everything that you've ever experienced, hurt, betrayal, destruction, you would be lying to me. This is not natural to us, but it is the process of growth, the process of restoration, the process of spiritual maturity that David is getting himself to, and that God uses in his word to help grow us. How do you let go of hurt? Let me ask you this question. As David casts his burden on the Lord and he trusts in God, how should we respond to hurt and betrayal? I see 4 things that David did. He was authentic, he remembered, he recognized, he relinquished. These things that I think David mirrors for us, it's only when we've experienced the growth that comes out of a trying time in our life that maybe this makes a little bit of sense. I wanted to show a video. Pastor Dan sent me a video. I ended up not doing it. It had a little bit of content that I thought maybe wouldn't be appropriate for everybody in here. And while it was really genuine and authentic, I just chose to summarize it instead. I also think we couldn't show it on our live stream. So this is so that everybody who's watching this morning can track with us. But this testimony of this guy who is sharing his story in one of the steps of regeneration. I think it's step 8. And I don't know if I remember correctly. Is it amends? That is step 8. So trying to figure out how to forgive and to move past and to restore a relationship. And so the well, who Pastor Dan and I went and visited them and saw their program, it was really encouraging, and that's where some of this has kind of stemmed from. They do a really good job of putting out videos of testimonies to help. And there's a guy who shares his testimony of this specific betrayal. He's talking about a time in his life. He was married to his wife for some period of time, and they were going through difficulty and pursuing divorce. And it was interesting to watch him, even on stage, remember. You could see the feeling as he recounted where he was. Everything, he would say this, everything from his perspective was his wife's fault, right? It was his wife who was not doing anything right, wasn't responding correctly, who was the cause of the hurt and betrayal. And I'm sure to some extent there's probably validity to that. I don't know that you could say it was all her. He probably was culpable to some extent as well, because we all are. But as he recounts this story, he's talking about getting to this step where he came into the program a little bit unwillingly, just to kind of go through the motion so he could say he tried, and God used the program to get a hold of his heart. And it was interesting that he sat on stage and said it wasn't until his mentor was talking about this process of amends with him, and he asked him, like what is it going to take? And the guy was so hard in his heart to say, there is nothing that can fix this. It's all her. She has to own it all. And his mentor challenged him and said, okay, but what does it look like for you to let go? Even if all of that is true, even if she never comes to you and asks for reconciliation and restores the relationship and admits what she did, what does it look like for you to let go? I would imagine that some of our stories that are flashing through our mind right now involve somebody who maybe didn't know what they were doing, maybe more likely did, but was just unwilling to repair the relationship. Maybe to this day, that person that has that biggest hurt in your life is cut off, refuses to connect. Maybe it's a spouse or an ex-spouse. It's a family member, a son or a daughter or a mom or a dad. Maybe it's a coworker, a boss who you trusted. And I think that question that this guy's mentor asked him, what would it look like for you to let go, is a question that you and I need to ask ourselves. When we experience hurt, when we experience betrayal, what does it look like for you and I to let go of those things? It was really eye-opening for me to hear this guy. You can hear the emotion, but he said through this process, and it didn't all end there, but through walking through this idea of making amends, he realized that the hurt that he was holding on to, it wasn't hurting his wife. Who was it hurting? It was hurting him. Some of us have been holding on to things for a long time. And justified or not, at the end of the day, it hurts us. It blocks our ability to be in right relationship, even with the Lord, because we haven't got to the point where we say, regardless of right or wrong or all of the things that led to this point in my life, I'm hurting. I'm going to be authentic about it and say that I am hurting. But God, you've made yourself known. You've made yourself known. Your character, your qualities, the things that you are about are true, are righteous, are holy. And you've revealed them to us so that when we understand you and we recognize the effect of sin in our lives, the right response is not to hold on to those things that hurt us because we can take care of them on our own, we'll handle it, we'll deal with it. David says, I'm giving you my burdens, and I'm trusting you. This guy that worked with my youth staff, I tried to have talks with them through this. This was the realest example in my life I can think of. he was not willing to talk to me. He kept me at arm's length. He talked to people who would bend to those sins that he was giving into, but not to me. And I realized, not immediately, it took some time, that the more that I wanted to be bitter and upset with him, all that it was doing was hurting my relationship with the Lord and my ability to be relationally transparent with those students that I was still dealing with, working with, being able to disciple. You and I have an opportunity, because we will taste hurt and betrayal in life. That's a guarantee. It's how you and I respond to it that will shape either our stagnant response and bitterness that swells up within us, or our ability to relinquish the burden, to give it to the Lord who is able to carry it for us, and to trust that whatever is going to happen to the person who betrayed us, God's going to deal rightly with that. Now, I'll add this in as an aside. All of us in this room have been hurt. I would imagine there's some of us in this room that have hurt others. I think that David's response of reading his heart on his sleeve maybe will give us a little bit of insight to say, what do I need to do with those that I've mistreated? And I think that we can get to the end, to verses 22 and 23, and say, those hurts that I've done, I can own those things. And the burden that maybe it wears on me, I can give that to the Lord too. If you and I would do that, whether we've been hurt or we've been the one who has hurt, we can grow from these things and reflect what it is to be in relationship with the Lord. I hope that that's an encouragement to you. It's been an encouragement to me this week as I've been processing this psalm. How do we let go? Well, it starts and it centers on our relationship with the Lord. Amen? Let's pray. God, you are so good to us, to be patient and long-suffering in the imperfections of the things that we experience. God, I'm thankful for the ways that you have showed grace and mercy to me in the ways that I have hurt others. I pray that you'd help me to learn from those things and to grow in my ability to see others the way that you see them. And God, for those ways that I have been hurt, I ask that through this example, this prayer of David that he exemplifies for us, that you'd help me to put into practice these things. Help me not to lie to myself, but to be authentic with where I'm at. Help me to recognize your work in the past and your continued work in the present and future. Help me to recognize that I am not immune to sin, and that sin done to me and by me requires a response. And that response starts with me laying those things at your feet. It is only possible to do this because of Jesus. We recognize that. Pray that every single person in this room has an understanding of what it is to be changed because of Jesus, because of his perfect life laid down and his victorious resurrection to defeat the consequences of sin and to restore us into right relationship. Would that be the starting point for all of us, God? And as we respond to the gospel, help us to every day make strides that exemplify spiritual maturity to look less like the world and to look more like Christ. We pray by the power of the Holy Spirit in our lives and through the work of Jesus on the cross. Amen.